A voice cries, "In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and the uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken." May God richly bless these words of Scripture. The journey to Christmas makes 4 stops along the way. At each stop, we light a candle to signify the growing light that is coming into the world. I invite you now to prepare your hearts and minds for the lighting of our first candle as we join together in this song.
Please participate with us in the lighting in the litany and the candle of hope. You're invited. Come home for Christmas. No words.
Do we not have the litany? If we don't,
If we don't,
Read it together.
we can just read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
yeah. Again, you're invited. Come home for Christmas.
There is reason to rejoice at the sound of this invitation.
In those words is God's hope for the world,
A hope not yet fully realized.
but a hope that shall be born anew in Bethlehem of our hearts.
Let us light this first candle of the Advent season, signifying the light of hope. You join me in prayer. A single light now glows among the Advent candles. A light that comes from you. A light that comes from you, O Lord, whose glory and grace shine upon this world. A world that often feels dark and lonely. Allow this candle to be a hint for us. A hope of what is to come. Amen. I don't know what it was like at your household growing up, but I can remember sitting at the table for a meal, sitting there right after the prayer and jumping into this moment of, well, a showdown, an epic stare down. In our household, that was an annual occasion at most holidays, specifically at Christmas time or at Thanksgiving, because something important was at stake. Something along the lines of who was going to get the big piece of pie, or who was going to get the drumstick, or who was going to have to clean up the dishes, or who was going to have to get up and moved to that chair that no one liked to sit in at the table. But because we have guests, every chair has to be used. When you got to that moment, that epic stare down, before you entered into it, you always blinked a few times, kind of moistened the eyes, so that you were ready to go into this moment. And then you counted down 3, 2, 1, and then boom, you were there. Whoever your opponent was, whoever you were after, you were in this stare down match. Would you blink? Would you blink? Your eyes were about ready to bug out, but you were holding out, just trying to be victorious. And if you were, it was great. You got whatever it was that you wanted. But if not, you always came back with those same words. 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3. But it never worked. The shame of loss. And that little sliver of pumpkin pie would be put in front of you versus that big piece that got put in front of the victor. You may find this surprising, but there are those out there who take stare downs very seriously. You go online, you can find websites that help you train for a stare down. It talks about how practicing days in advance in front of the mirror, that is good preparation for a stare down. Always carry with you eye drops. Put in a few right before the stare down. It helps keep those eyes open a little longer. And then one of the recommendations that seemed strange to me was that you were encouraged to keep a song in the back of your head, a soothing song that would calm your nerves in that tense moment. These are folks that take stare downs very seriously. Well, as we enter into this Advent season, we are talking about coming home for Christmas. And each of the 4 weeks, we're going to focus on one of those words, coming home for Christmas. Today, focusing on this idea of coming home, of arriving, of reaching the destination. But the question is, who is on the move? Who blinked first and lost and was forced to get up and to make that effort, make that move? Often when I've heard this passage from Isaiah referenced, this passage that then will be quoted by John the Baptist later, about preparing the way, about clearing out the obstacles along the path, I'm fascinated how people then interpret it in a way that really isn't true to the text. Because what they say is that we need to clear the path so that we can go and search for God, that we can travel the path to find God. But that's not what the text says. It makes it sound like we lost, we blinked, and so we're the ones that have to get up and move as if God's rubbing it in, saying, "Ha ha, you lost, come and find me." But is that really what the text said? Is that really what we know about God? When Isaiah first shared these words, it was some 500 years before Jesus. 500 years, and yet he was speaking to a people that were in exile. They had been yanked out of their homes around Jerusalem, around the center of their faith, and they were taken far away to Babylon. They were a people who were yearning to go home. They yearned. And the prophet doesn't get up in front of them and say, "Good luck on that one. Hope you make it." No, instead, the prophet invites them to clear a path because God is on the move. God is the one who is coming to a foreign land, which was mind-blowing to these people, because at that time, gods were associated with one people, one nation, one geography. Gods didn't cross barriers or boundaries, but God was coming across the desert. God was making a way to this land where other gods were worshiped, to a people who felt forsaken and forgotten. The good news is that the prophet is saying, prepare the way because God is coming here. Suddenly the people glimpse a part of God that they did not know before. Or may I suggest that they glimpsed a part of God that they had forgotten. Because in fact, this is not new. The story of Abraham and Sarah, when they were first known as Abram and Sarai, God came to them and invited them on a long journey. But not just once, God met them again and again and again along that journey. When the Israelites later were in Egypt, when they were slaves there, God came to them. God crossed the desert and came to where they were. During the period of Judges, where again and again the people turned away from God, God found a way of coming and meeting the people where they were. And now in exile, where the prophet Isaiah is speaking, he offers words that jogs their memories about a God who crosses deserts and makes a way and comes to them. John the Baptist uses that same image, stirring the recollection of the people, for they were, at the time of Jesus' birth, under Roman occupation. They felt, for lack of a better word, like they were slaves. They were trapped. And what the prophet's words through John are that, guess what? God comes again. A few weeks ago, I talked about how I would often, when I lived in Missouri, go and visit Conception Abbey, a monastery where I would go for prayer and a time of reflection. And one of the times I was there, I was talking to a monk who I created just a wonderful relationship with. But he was telling me about when he was in discernment, trying to decide whether he was going to be a priest. And he said something to me that has stayed with me. He said, I went looking for God, only to discover that God had found me long before I ever knew I needed finding. I love that line, that God had found me long before I even knew I needed finding. This theme for Advent, of coming home for Christmas, gives the impression that we are the ones that need to come home. And yes, it is an invitation to come and be a part of community, come and be a part of this experience. But what we learn in this story is that God is the one who is on the move. This is not a change, though, for God. But in Advent, we are preparing for God this time who's holding nothing back. The very essence of God, the fullness of God is going to be born into the world. And yet there are still those voices out there who say, no, you got to first earn it. You got to do what you got to do. You got to make it happen, as if we got to go, come on, God. Come on, let's do the stare down. Come on, let's see who will blink first. Who's going to have to move first? Mano a mano, or in this case, eye to eye. Come on, God. I ran away from home twice in my life. Actually, the first time really didn't count. I'd never made it out the front door. But the second time I did. Though I walked very slowly toward that front door, thinking that Mom would stop me. But she just said, don't forget to write. But when you do, don't ask for money. I went out that front door and walked to the corner. We lived on the corner, so it was about 15 feet. And I stood there for the longest time, I think trying to give this sense that I was determining which was the best direction. Finally, when no one came out, I decided to venture up the street toward my friend David Hammond's house. It was almost a block away. I had walked it before alone, but my plan was not to go to David's house. It was to venture beyond David's house, and I'd never been there before. I walked with my bag that block or so and got out in front of David's house and pondered whether I would go in and get a snack for my journey, but decided not to, and I continued on. I got to the edge of David's property, and I stepped beyond it. I was now in uncharted territory, and I went probably another 20 feet, and I stopped and stood there for the longest time, and then burst into tears. I turned around, and there was my mom, and my friend David's mom. The moment I walked out the door, Mom had gotten on the phone to some of the neighbors and said, just keep on the lookout for. And she'd gotten calls back, yeah, he just passed our house. It took about 10 minutes for him to walk past our house. He's walking pretty slow. And then Mom just kind of followed me, and when it was finally that moment, she came to me where I was. Is that not the heart of a parent? Is that not what a mother or a father does when a child is lost? I mean, I'm far from a perfect parent, but I know that in that moment when you realize your child is lost or out there, you have to do something. You've got to go. You got to rally the troops. You got to send out search parties. You got to do whatever you need to do. And in both cases that I think of, when my son got lost and we realized that and we rallied all these people, when we found him, he didn't realize he was lost. He didn't realize he was lost. But when it comes to God, there's no lag time here. No decision-making process, should I not. There's no concern that it's a holiday in heaven and the angelic host won't be back in until Tuesday. No, God moves. God reacts because that is who God is. And even though we're in that mood of saying, come on, God, come on, you gotta be right here, God. Let's see who can win. Let's see who can be victorious. Let's see who really has to move. God is saying, I already chose to lose so that you could win. When my grandparents would come and visit us at Christmas, they come every other year and stay for a couple of weeks. There would be a meal early on in that trip where I would look at my grandfather as soon as the prayer was over and say, okay, Granddad, right here, stare off for whatever it was, for the big piece of pie, for the big chunk of whatever it was. Come on, Granddad, let's do it. Stare off. And my grandfather would always go, okay, and he'd go all through these rituals of preparing, stretching and trying to get his eyes ready. And then he'd say, okay, let's go. 1, 2, 3. And he'd go, blink, I lost, let's eat. And I'd be sitting there still going, come on, I got to win this one, come on. And he'd be filling his plate. Well, that's the way it is with God. I think some of us are still standing there. Come on, God. Come on, bring it on right here. Let's win this. I got to do this one. I got to earn this one. And God's already filling the plate. But it's not a plate for God. It's a plate for us. A plate heaping with grace and mercy and kindness and generosity that God brings to us right where we are. And our eyes are bloodshot, still saying, come on, God. Come on. And God's saying, I blinked long ago and came to you. And I'll do it again and again and again, because that is who our God is. And this Advent season, let us not think that it's going to be any different. God will find a new way, a creative way, because that's who God is. God will find a way to enter into your life anew, because that's what God has always done. You join me in prayer? With with foil-covered leftovers from Thanksgiving still in the refrigerator, we find ourselves at the entrance of another season, Advent. The advent of your gracious gift, an advent of your love, O God, a love that first came to us, a love that made a way into our lives. It is this season in which we make ourselves ready for your arrival, for your very presence to be born anew into the world and into our lives. And yet it's coming, whether we are ready or not. With each year, it is easy to see why we need you. But this year there appears an even greater need. So much tension, mistrust, so much hurt and confusion in our communities and in our world, so much hate and violence. Where do we go from here, Lord? And yet in those moments, what we learn is that you are coming to us. That in the words of the prophet, that we are to prepare for your arrival. That you are the one who is on the move. But let us not expect you in the usual ways. Can't expect you to come in the usual places of power, the political circles, the places of authority, those places where financial deals are being made. No, you are the one that comes as a child, a vulnerable child, a weak child, as you attempt to point out to us in such a profound and powerful way that you are a God that finds a way into our lives, into our situations, into our circumstances. This morning, God, we are thankful for that gift. God, we're also mindful of our sisters and brothers, including Ken and Janet, Diane, Jack, Karen. May you be present to these people with your love. And yet, with that request, we know that you have already made a way. That you weren't just waiting around in heaven for us to ask, but you are the God who first loved us. We offer these words this morning in the name of that wonderful gift, the Christ child, that is being born anew into the world this day.